Welcome into Tide and Tiger with Scott Griffin here, also Rodney Orr of TiderInsider.com as we preview Bama against Ole Miss. Rodney, how are you?
I'm doing great, Scott. How are you?
Doing wonderful. Is there any way, people were asking me, can we bottle what Alabama did Saturday and just kind of take it off the shelf when we need it? That was unreal.
Wow, it was unbelievable. What a performance. I mean, you know, you look at it and you say they got everything out of that team on that particular day that they could, because offensively, 677 total yards, defensively, only giving up 78 yards and 3 first downs. I mean, what an incredible performance. And I can't tell you, Scott, I need to go back and count how many guys played in that game for Alabama. I don't know if Nick Saban's ever played that many guys in a single game. I mean, you're talking about basically 3 offensive lines played, 2 quarterbacks played, several tight ends, probably at least 4, probably 6 or 7 wide receivers at least. On the defensive side, they played a lot of guys. Pretty phenomenal when you look at it overall.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. And it's just I called it the best performance in Nick Saban's 11 years, totally. It's probably not
definitely
far off.
On offense.
Yeah,
definitely on offense. You know, they've had some incredible performances defensively. You know, the performance they had against LSU in the national championship game, where I think LSU crossed midfield once maybe in that particular game for a play or two, and then Jordan Jefferson got stripped of the ball. Vanderbilt didn't cross the 50 in this game. So just like you said, it really was an all-around performance. The thing is, there's still a long way to go. This is early in the season. Alabama's 4-0. They played a couple of, certainly FSU's, even though they're 0-2, we know they've got quality athletes. They're a good team. Vanderbilt's a team that's better. They've improved, certainly, although they didn't show it on Saturday. But Alabama has a long way to go. A lot of really top quality opponents coming up.
No doubt about it. Ole Miss, one of those, but I don't know, and I think people are unsure what they're going to get here from the Rebels at 8 o'clock. Now, we know what's happened the last 3 years. There have been a couple of losses, and then I don't know if it was miraculous last year, but it was pretty darn impressive comeback by Alabama last year. That shouldn't be the case this year, but this is still a dangerous football team offensively, as you know, with big wideouts and Shea Patterson pulling the trigger.
Yeah, Shea Patterson, a sophomore quarterback out of Louisiana. I mean, this guy has all the talent in the world, all the potential. You know, he's a guy, Scott, that we said on our TV show, Tider Insider TV, also said on a podcast recently that, you know, he can remind you sometimes of Johnny Manziel. He has the ability to scramble around, keep plays alive with his feet, keeps his eyes upfield, makes throws down the field on the run. He can pull it down and go with it. I mean, he's a dangerous guy. He's certainly going to have to be accounted for throughout the game. And then the wide receivers that he has to throw to, they have 4 outstanding, probably even more, 4 outstanding targets when you're talking about DK Metcalf, Van Jefferson, A.J. Brown, who I thought coming out of high school was another Julio Jones, and he's averaging 129 yards a game receiving this year, one of the top 2 or 3 in the country. And then right behind him, he has a teammate, DeMarcus Lodge, who's averaging right at 95 yards a game receiving. Those are 4 big, strong, physical wide receivers. But I guarantee you they are going to be very difficult for this Alabama defense, the secondary, to handle.
Yeah, and then we don't even talk about Metcalf, the freshman, at 82 yards, right? I mean, they got 3 in the top 6 or 7 in the conference in not only receptions, but receiving yards a game. So it's not like you can go send Minkah Fitzpatrick on a guy, lock him down, and play zone. I mean, that they're going. You got to play team defense.
Yeah, you really do. And then you have to account for the quarterback, who he may throw it, he may scramble. There's no telling what he might do. Shea Patterson's number 2 in the country right now in passing per game at 427 yards. He has 11 touchdown passes. Now, he did throw 3 picks in their last game against Cal, which was a loss. I think it was 27-16. They really struggled in that game, Scott. Now, one of the keys has been their starting center went out in that game, missed most of that game, had some surgery. That really hurt them because the backup was injured too, I think. So they were down to the third string guy. Now, it's expected that the center might be able to return for this game. He had one of those micro surgeries. So we'll see what happens. If he can't come back, that could be really huge for Ole Miss, not having him in this game.
No doubt about it. And this is going to be a game that really Alabama can take steps forward again on their way to building their team even better in totality. Again, we're kind of focusing on the Ole Miss offense, but I'm looking at their defense too, for sure as well. But let's hear from Nick Saban on what the defensive line needs to do. I mean, they've got to get pressure on Shea Patterson because they're throwing out adjectives like the word Manziel when they're talking about Shea Patterson.
I think when the defensive line can control the quarterback, that is very, very helpful. But when he extends plays, it's a Johnny Manziel type of game, and it's very, very difficult on defensive players, and it takes a lot out of the players because they're actually chasing the player 2 or 3 times longer in a play than a normal play. So these kind of quarterbacks, can be problematic if you can't control them with the athleticism of your rushers.
All right, that's Nick Saban. Now, obviously, it would help if you can get pressure without bringing blitz. We know Jeremy Pruitt likes to do it. But here, Rodney, look at Alabama. Only 5 sacks, tied for 12th in the league. That's got to go up.
Yeah, I think obviously part of that, you lose Terrell Lewis and Christian Miller there early in the first, in the first game. That hurts your pass rush. Those 2 guys can really put pressure on the quarterback, get to him. Rashaan Evans was out for 2 weeks after that as well. So they're really kind of recovering. And then also Anthony Jennings missed for 2 weeks after the opener. So those things really hurt. I thought last week against Vanderbilt, they got better pressure on the quarterback. You saw Mac Wilson lining up outside, really getting a lot of pressure. I think with Rashaan Evans back now, that's going to help. I think using Deshaun Hand standing up as an end type, maybe as almost like a jack linebacker rushing the passer, that certainly seemed to create some pressure a little bit. I think with Anthony Jennings back, you saw him get pressure. So all of those things combined, I think those would be helpful. Now, too, remember, against Colorado State and also Fresno State, those quarterbacks were in systems where they were trying to get the ball out really quickly to negate the rush. And I think that obviously kind of slowed down some of those pass rushing numbers. But, again, your point is extremely well taken, Scott. Alabama's got to get pressure on the quarterback. They've got to keep their rushing lanes up front so that they don't allow Shea Patterson to get loose. And they're going to have to chase him. They're going to have to put him on the ground. It's going to be a real big challenge.
Look for Deron Payne to have a big game because Ole Miss has to play their backup center in this game. And we all know what Deron Payne can do against the best of linemen, much less a guy that's a backup.
Could be playing with their third-team center if it, things shake out the way they possibly could. So that obviously that would be a real disadvantage for the Ole Miss offense. But, Deron Payne, certainly Josh Frazier's had a good start as well. Raekwon Davis up front. Isaiah Buggs seems to be coming along really well. Of course, Quinnen Williams is still in the mix. And, all those guys up front seem to play a lot faster against Vanderbilt. And I think part of that had to do some with the return of Evans and also putting Mac Wilson out on the edge in pass rushing situations, and also Anthony Jennings. All of those things, I think, combined against Vanderbilt to make that defensive front play a little bit faster. And they're going to have to be ready to do it come Saturday night.
Plus, there's the desperation element of Ole Miss. They've got nothing to lose, right? Matt Luke's trying to win a job. I mean, that makes them more dangerous as well as their talent.
Yeah, they can come in and just take chances. I mean, like you said, what do they have to lose? Nothing. I mean, obviously they lost to Cal. They have the NCAA stuff hanging over their heads. A lot of people think they may not even be able to make it to a bowl game, might get that stripped from them again this year due to their NCAA issues. All of those things combined, these players, they've heard all that stuff. They've carried the weight on their shoulders of it. Now I think they're just, they can be loose. They can play loose. They can play free. They can take a lot of chances. It'll be interesting.
Rodney Orr of Tiger Insider, Scott Griffin here with Tide and Tiger. Dan Werner, you remember, is the offensive coordinator that really damaged Alabama in the last few years.
Absolutely.
Now he's an offensive analyst with the Crimson Tide. Nick Saban had this to say about Werner's involvement, not only this week, but to the team in general.
Dan is a really good coach, and he's been very, very helpful in doing self-scout on the things that we do on offense, and also making contributions every week to some things that would complement some of the things that we do. And I think it's been very, very beneficial to helping us have a little more of an NFL flavor in terms of some of the passing game, but also being able to do some of the things that Jalen is pretty good at from a spread standpoint. And I think he's been very, very helpful in the planning of some of the things that we've done on offense.
I know it's kind of hard to dissect and see Werner's influence. Just your thought on what Saban had to say about it.
Well, first of all, I think Dan Werner, I agree. He is a great coach. What a tremendous hire to grab that guy from Ole Miss. Certainly I think he gives you insight to, from an outside perspective coming in on your offense and the things that maybe you could do differently, which I think he did. I think one of the first things he did, Scott, was talk about how Alabama could utilize the middle of the field much better than what they did last year. I don't think that was a secret to Nick Saban, but I think it was something that Dan Werner certainly pointed out and had some suggestions on how to do it. Also, I think when you're looking at this particular game, Ole Miss, he knows their personnel. He knows things they do. He could probably help you on both sides of the ball in terms of how to attack Ole Miss, so maybe some helpful input there, but also defensively, some of the things they do with their personnel and how maybe Alabama can defend them. I think maybe he could help you in both those ways because of his knowledge of that program.
It should be a very, very helpful aid for them to go along. But remember, he can't coach on the field. He can coach coaches. That's the role of analysts there. Rushing the football, they don't have a lot going on, Rodney. Basically over 200 yards or so, and we're including South Alabama and UT Martin in those totals. So, this is a team that's going to throw it around, no doubt.
They do have some. Jordan Wilkins is not a bad running back, and I know Devon Penniman, he's probably their best running back out of the state of Texas, a sophomore who Alabama recruited quite heavily, as a matter of fact, a couple of years ago. But Devon Penniman's an excellent back. They just haven't carried the ball very much because everything's been on the back of Shea Patterson and also those wide receivers. And if you look at the offensive line individually, I think there's some highly recruited players. Rod Taylor, the right tackle, was very highly recruited out of Jackson Callaway. Alabama recruited him. They recruited Greg Little, the left tackle, out of Allen, Texas, who started last year as a true freshman. Javon Patterson was an outstanding player from the Hattiesburg area coming out of high school that Alabama also recruited. So they've got some really quality players up front offensively, guys that were highly recruited. Scott, the thing with Ole Miss is, and this is on both sides of the ball, they're just not very deep. And I think on the defensive side is where it's really where it eventually shows up during the course of a game against a team that can pound the football like Alabama.
Absolutely correct, Rodney, and I agree with that assessment. And they do have talent. I think that's what people forget with all this NCAA talk floating around. Sure, it affects them now as far as people choosing them now, but talent is still on that campus. As you know, when NCAA things happen, it's usually 2 to 3 years down the road. So to totally take this team light from a fan's perspective is not real wise.
Yeah, just like on the defensive side of the ball. And they've struggled. Look, they've struggled stopping the run. They're giving up 185 yards a game rushing. And you mentioned the competition, not necessarily, road graders that they've been facing for sure. They're giving up nearly 5 yards per rush up front. Now, with that said, would it surprise me if they defended Alabama's run game better than what they have the others? Yeah, possibly so, because they don't have bad players. I think they'll be highly motivated in this game. Breland Speaks is an outstanding defensive lineman. Josiah Coatney, both those guys were recruited by Alabama. Marquise Haynes is a guy that's been around, a great speed rush guy. Benito Jones is up front defensively. He's kind of their interior guy at about 315 pounds. He was recruited heavily by Alabama and was once committed to Alabama. So those guys are really good players. Not sure about their linebackers. That's been a question mark. The safeties, the DBs as a whole, they're athletic. They certainly have some talent back there. But again, their defense is thin, and they've worn out eventually even last year as the season went along. I mean, they really had a hard time kind of maintaining throughout the season. And, an Alabama offensive line, if it can perform, if this offensive line can line up and perform like they did in the Vanderbilt game and control the line of scrimmage, that's going to take a twofold effect on Ole Miss. Number one is it keeps Shea Patterson and those receivers on the sideline. Number two, you're wearing out that defense, and if you punch the ball in and you hold it and you punch it in, it's going to take a real toll on that defense over the course of the game.
I had a chance to talk to Matt Luke this week, and this is kind of funny, Rodney. I asked him about, or I started to ask him actually before he interrupted me, about looking at Alabama video after the Vanderbilt game, comparing it to before. Here's what he had to say. After looking at the Vanderbilt video from the other previous
yeah. Right.
What do you think?
They're good. They're good. I'm very, very impressed. Very impressed with their stable of running backs. How cool under pressure that Jalen Hurts is. Just they got two really, really fast wide receivers, so you can't just wholesale out to the run. And then defense, I was excited that they lost 6 guys to the NFL, but then you turn the tape on, it doesn't really reflect that. They just kind of reloaded. So, just very impressed. Just they're a great team, and they're number one in the country for a reason.
You are not allowing cell phone videos, I hope, predicting anything from your team.
No, I don't. I think our guys have a great amount of respect for Alabama and what they've been able to do and their consistency. But I also think they're excited for the challenge and just having the opportunity to go compete on that stage and just kind of lay it on the line and see what happens.
Okay, you heard Matt Luke there just laughing, comparing Alabama after Vanderbilt to before, talking about how loaded they are. So I'm sure the Vandy video really jumps off the screen to any coach that's looking at it.
Well, I tell you what, if you watch that film of the Vanderbilt game and you're a future opponent coming up, you got to gasp a little bit and say, well, wow, because it was what we saw up front offensively and with those running backs, those 2 quarterbacks, those receivers. I mean, once they get it all going, Scott, I mean, and again, I'm usually conservative when I evaluate Alabama. I'm not trying to go overboard here. That might be in maybe their peak performance. You would hope not. But if they can come close to that, with the talent that they have, it's going to be very difficult for these teams coming up to really slow this machine down because, again, it all starts up front with the offensive line.
Yeah,
Bradley Bozeman, Ross Piercebaker, and Lester Cotton all thought those 3 guys on the interior, they had probably their best games.
Yeah, and the second team line was really good as well. And that Nick Saban and the coaching staff, they're looking for back-to-back domination. As he said, we don't want to win. We want to defeat the opponent. And, that was a pretty impactful statement. Yeah, and that was probably been a while since they had done that. Felt like they had done that overall. I tell you one thing, going to the offensive line, we saw a little bit of it in the Vanderbilt game where they lined up 2 tackles on one side, an unbalanced line. Saw them working a lot of that Alabama in practices this week with Matt Womack and left tackle Jonah Williams, both on the same side. They would flip-flop sides, both on the right side, then both on the left. And on the opposite side, they had 2 tight ends with Hill Hinches and Irv Smith. So that could be something that would be very interesting to watch this week against Ole Miss, to see how much do they actually line up in an unbalanced line and really try to, pound it at Ole Miss with that. All right, so Bama, Ole Miss, 8 o'clock, late kick. Everybody's got to sit in the hotel room all day. That's going to be horrible, but 8 o'clock kick at Bryant-Denny Stadium. What's happening on the recruiting front? The week before, last week, Alabama got a kid out of Texas to commit. What's the latest right now as you're looking at the landscape? Well, Scott, a pretty big visit weekend. Now, let's kind of warn everyone that sometimes these guys set up these unofficial visits for this weekend, for game weekends, and things pop up. So all these lists that you see with
75 to 100 names. You know, sometimes half those guys don't even show up because of different things that come up. They have travel that they have to consider. It's late night, so they have to grab hotels, and a lot of these guys can't afford that. So, you know, the things change. So let's be clear about that. They do have some guys coming in on official visits to some really top players expected in. Emil Ekiyor is a great offensive guard from Indianapolis, Indiana, committed to Michigan. I think Alabama has an excellent shot at him. He's been down here several times already. You know, Scott, he may be the premier offensive guard in the country. And I think Alabama has a great shot to flip him. A couple of guys that are already committed to Alabama coming in for those visits are Tommy Brown out of Mater Dei out in Santa Ana, California, big 6'7", 315-pound offensive tackle. Slade Bolden is a versatile player. I think he'll be a slot receiver at Alabama. I really like this guy. He brings a lot of versatility to the game, and I think he's going to be an excellent slot receiver at Alabama. He's out of West Monroe, Louisiana. Of course, he's committed. Jalen Waddle. He's a guy that I've been harping about for four months now, since June, when he came in and just dominated Alabama's camp. I'm telling you, this guy has some skills like Amari Cooper and David Palmer. I'm not saying he's those guys. I'm saying he has skills very similar in some ways. He is a dynamo player, about 5'10", 175. I think Alabama's in great shape with Jalen Waddle. Florida State, Texas A&M also in there. He's out of Bel Air, Texas, which is really the Houston area. But keep an eye on Jalen Waddle, Scott. This guy, I'm telling you, if Alabama gets him to go with Ruggs and Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy and all these other guys that they have at the wide receiver spot, wow, Alabama will be loaded with playmakers outside. Some other guys that are expected to come in.
Let me stop you there before you go on.
Sure.
Because a lot of people are going to think, oh, well, they've got so many wide receivers. Why? But we forget Ridley, Sims, Foster, all gone. So that's 3 gone right there. And all those guys start.
Yeah, Ridley, of course, expected to declare early.
Right.
So yeah, I mean they're going to need to restock. I mean, people think, well, you know, like you said, but no, you have to restock every year. And I think that it's important that Alabama land these guys. Obviously, I mentioned Slade Bolden is a slot receiver. Justin Ross is a top player out of Phoenix City Central and here in Alabama. A lot of people think he might be the number 1 player in the state, or certainly one of the best.
Sure.
He's a wide receiver, got some good hype to him. I think Alabama, I know people have been saying Clemson recently, but he and his grandmother came over for a visit a couple of weeks ago. It went extremely well. He's coming back this weekend. I think Alabama's in great shape with him right now. Of course, it's going to be a battle. We'll see how it all unfolds. They've got some other really outstanding players coming in. Kelvin Joseph is a defensive back committed to LSU out of Baton Rouge. Now, before you say, well, you know, he's committed to LSU, he's in Baton Rouge, listen, don't forget about last year with Dylan Moses and Chris Allen. Both those guys, Baton Rouge natives, end up in Tuscaloosa in this class. Isaiah Buggs was a lot for LSU. He's out of Ruston, Louisiana. He ended up here. Devontae Smith. You know, Alabama raided the state of Louisiana last year. They're in on Kelvin Joseph right now, and Alabama really needs defensive backs. So he's going to be here. Jacob Copeland is a wide receiver. I call him a wide receiver / athlete. Could even play in the secondary. He's out of Pensacola Pine Forest. He's committed to Florida, but, you know, Scott, he's having some second thoughts. Things at Florida have been a little shaky lately, so he's kind of coming back up here for the second time in a few weeks, so I'd keep my eye on him. Connis Miller is a tremendous defensive line prospect out of Jackson Olin. Alabama, Auburn, and Florida, his top 3. He's going to announce on October the 14th between those 3, and you know, I really think that Connis has been a lifelong Alabama fan. I do think there's some influences there, though, that are really strong for Auburn. So keep an eye on Connis Miller. He's coming in this weekend. Adam Anderson's a top linebacker out of Rome, Georgia, expected to come down to Alabama and Georgia for him. Bobby Brown, remember that name. He may be one of the top 1 or 2 defensive line targets on Alabama's list right now. He's out of Arlington, Lamar, Texas. He's a teammate of redshirt freshman Chris Owens, an offensive lineman at Alabama right now. So that gives Alabama a little bit of an inside track there. Bobby's being highly recruited by, you know, Texas, Oklahoma, various other schools around the country. But I think Alabama's in good position with him. Savion Smith is a former 5-star recruit that signed with LSU a couple of years ago. Really was a Les Miles type guy. I don't think he was too enamored with, once Orgeron's regime took over. He left LSU in June. He's now at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. He's a top-notch cornerback, and we've talked about Alabama's needs at corner, Scott. Savion Smith, I think he's leaning strongly to Alabama right now, so I'd keep an eye on him. Some guys that I'm not sure they're going to make it, but to keep an ear out for, Nadab Joseph. We've mentioned him. He's a top defensive back out of Hialeah, Florida. He was originally committed to LSU. He's going to make himself a video and announce it here pretty soon where he's going. Alabama, I think, has been the team that's been on top here recently. Tyson Campbell and Patrick Surtain are both 1-2 in the nation, according to some, as cornerback prospects at the same high school. How would you like to have those two guys on your high school team at Plantation American Heritage down in South Florida? Both those guys, I'm telling you, they like Alabama quite a bit. Alabama has a growing kind of relationship with Surtain. Campbell's liked Alabama for quite a while, and Josh Jobe is another one originally out of Miami. He's up at Cheshire Academy in Connecticut right now. He's another cornerback that Alabama's in on. So I think recruiting overall is going really well. I know fans have said, why is Alabama struggling? They're not struggling. We've talked about this since last February. They were going to take a more methodical approach to taking commitments this year, make sure they thoroughly evaluate players. And you mentioned the kid that just committed, Vernon Jackson, out of the state of Texas. He's an example, Scott. He's a guy that plays at Bowling, Texas. He's a high school quarterback. He's 6'2", 240. He's not going to be a quarterback in college. He's going to be a linebacker or possibly an H-back, but I'm almost sure Alabama he'll end up as a linebacker. He's a guy that came to camp, had a great camp this summer. He's rated as a 3-star by these services. I'm telling you, he's a 5-star talent. You watch. His stock is going to continue to rise. But last week in his game, just as a little side note, 9 carries, 225 yards. So here's a guy, 6'2", 240, legit speed, very athletic, who's vastly underrated.
Is that all you got?
I'm out of breath, man.
I mean, that's it? That's all the information you have for us here today?
I'm tired, incredible. Man. I'm tired.
Man, you got to start working more. What's the deal? No, that's great information, obviously. And it should be a stellar weekend as we start getting into the meat of the SEC schedule. More and more guys will start coming, right? I mean, that's what we can expect from here on out, I would guess.
Oh, absolutely. Look, the signing period, with the early signing period in December, now things are going to eventually pick up. I think you have to be careful with what you read sometimes. There's a lot of hyped up stories out there to try to grab, these guys. Alabama's still doing a thorough job of evaluating. I know that talking to some people that they were going to even thoroughly reevaluate their board after, near the halfway point of the high school season, to continue to evaluate, to make decisions on who they really want to take, who they feel comfortable they can get, and who they need to really pursue. I think this staff does as thorough of a job in terms of evaluating as anybody in the country. They're looking at some junior college defensive lineman, Caleb Tremblay, I should say, out of American River out in California. He's a guy to keep an ear out for. Talon Humphrey is a guy out in Kansas. It's a big 340-pound interior defensive lineman that they're looking at. So guys like that are still on the radar. Alabama's continuing to evaluate. I think you're going to see things really start to pick up here. Within the next 6 weeks or so, you'll start seeing things start to maybe materialize or crystallize, however you want to phrase it. I think you'll see more of that as we get closer to that December signing period.
All right. For Rodney Orr of Tiger Insider, Scott Griffin of Tide and Tiger. Don't forget, we'll talk to you after the game, give you our thoughts on what we saw with Alabama and Ole Miss, and obviously on Mondays, practice reports and much more on the YouTube channel, Tide and Tiger, on Podbean at Tide and Tiger as well. And, of course, TiderInsider.com for all the best information, the forums, all the stuff that they got going on there. And with this basketball stuff going on, there's something to keep an eye on as well besides football. For Rodney Orr, Scott Griffin saying so long. We'll talk to you after the game right here.